The gunshot that split the Montana evening air came from the shadows of a saloon marked with years of hard living, much like its patrons. Isaac Hart had been riding for 3 days straight when he heard it, dust still clinging to his trail-worn denim and the brim of his weather-beaten hat pulled low against the setting sun. A man didn't survive 10 years as a ranch hand and sometimes deputy without developing instincts, and Isaacs were screaming at him now. The year was 1878, and Timber Creek was supposed to be just another stop on his journey north. He'd left Wyoming with nothing but his horse thunder, his Winchester rifle, and enough bitter memories to fill a bottle of the worst whiskey. "Stay out of it," he muttered to himself, tightening his grip on Thunder's reins. The chestnut stallion snorted impatiently, as if disagreeing with his master's hesitation. Isaac had seen enough trouble to last a lifetime, and something told him that whatever was happening in that narrow alley beside the Rusty Spur Saloon would only bring more. Yet his boots were moving before his mind had settled the matter, spurs jangling quietly as he hitched Thunder to the nearest post and approached the dim passage between buildings. His hand rested naturally on the walnut grip of his Colt revolver. 2 men stood over a woman crumpled against the weathered boards of the saloon's outer wall. Even in the fading light, Isaac could see the cruel intention in their stance. "Reckon she won't be so high and mighty now," one of them drawled, nudging the woman with a muddy boot. "Shoulda just paid your debts like everyone else, Miss Fancy." Isaac cleared his throat. "Evening, gentlemen." They spun toward him with the awkward speed of men who'd had more whiskey than sense. The taller one had a pistol already drawn, while his companion's hand hovered near his holster. "Best move along, stranger," said the armed man. "This ain't your concern." Isaac stepped forward, allowing the last rays of sunlight to illuminate his face. At 32, hard living had etched lines around his eyes and left a thin scar along his jawline, souvenirs from a life that had taught him when to walk away and when to stand firm. "When 2 men corner a woman in an alley, it becomes everyone's concern," Isaac replied evenly. His eyes flicked to the woman who was now struggling to sit upright. Even disheveled and in obvious distress, there was something striking about her determination in the set of her jaw, defiance in her eyes. "Do you know who she is?" the shorter man spat. "Naomi Fletcher. Runs that so-called art gallery that's nothing but a front. She's a cheat and a liar." "And a whore," added the taller man with a sneer. "They say she was a fancy lady in San Francisco before coming here to prey on honest folk." Isaac noticed how the woman flinched at those words, but her gaze remained steady, unflinching. "They say she was fallen," the man continued, his voice thick with contempt. Just another painted dove hiding behind fancy words. Something hardened in Isaac's expression. He'd heard similar judgments passed too easily in towns across the frontier. "That right?" he asked softly, his voice carrying the dangerous quietness of a mountain stream before the flood. "The way I see it," Isaac continued, taking another step forward, "whatever she was or is ain't for you to settle with violence. So either you gentlemen can walk away now, or we can determine which of us the good Lord's calling home tonight." The taller man raised his pistol higher. "You willing to die for a fallen woman, cowboy?" Isaac's hand hadn't moved from his holster, but his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "Then I'll fall with her too." What happened next unfolded in the space of heartbeats. The armed man's finger twitched. Isaac's draw was smooth as silk, born from years when speed meant survival. 2 shots cracked the evening stillness, but only one found its mark. The taller man dropped his weapon with a howl, clutching his bloodied hand. "Next one won't be so merciful," Isaac stated, his revolver now trained on the second man who had frozen with his hand halfway to his gun. "Take your friend and go, don't come back." They retreated with curses and threats, but Isaac paid them no mind. He holstered his weapon and turned his attention to the woman still sitting against the wall. "Miss Fletcher, is it?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Are you hurt?" Naomi Fletcher raised her eyes to his, and Isaac felt something shift inside him. They were amber in the fading light, intelligent and wary. A small trickle of blood ran from her temple where she'd evidently hit the wall. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady despite everything. Though I suspect I owe you my thanks, Mr. Hart, Isaac Hart, he replied, offering his hand. And no thanks necessary, just happened to be passing by. She took his hand, her grip surprisingly firm as he helped her to her feet. Well, Mr. Hart, your timing is impeccable, though I should warn you associating with me might not do your reputation any favors in Timber Creek. Isaac allowed himself a small smile. Never much cared for reputations, Miss Fletcher. Found they're usually built on other people's talk rather than truth. As they stepped out of the alley into the last glow of sunset, Isaac got his first proper look at Naomi Fletcher. She was perhaps 28, with auburn hair partially escaped from a once neat arrangement, and a simple but well-made dress that spoke of taste rather than extravagance. Despite the confrontation she'd just endured, she carried herself with dignity that couldn't be taught. "You're bleeding," he noted, gesturing to her temple. She touched the spot lightly. "It's nothing serious. My gallery is just down the street. I have supplies there to tend to it. If you don't mind, I'll walk with you," Isaac said. Those men might reconsider their retreat once the sting wears off. Naomi hesitated, studying him with those penetrating amber eyes. "You're not from Timber Creek, just arrived, was planning to stay the night before heading north." "To where? Haven't decided yet," he admitted. "Someplace that needs a man who can work cattle or keep the peace." A small smile touched her lips for the first time. "Well, Mr. Hart, Timber Creek could certainly use the latter." She gestured down the street. "My gallery is this way if you're still offering that escort." Isaac untied Thunder and led the horse alongside them as they walked down the main street. Even in the gathering dusk, he noticed the looks they received: curious, disapproving, speculative. Small towns had their own silent language, and this one was speaking volumes. "You've caused quite a stir," Naomi observed, following his gaze. "The mysterious stranger defending the town pariah." "And why might you be the pariah, Miss Fletcher?" Isaac asked. "Those men mentioned debts." She sighed. "It's a long story, Mr. Hart, and not one suited for the street. But I assure you, I pay my debts both financial and moral." They arrived at a modest storefront with large windows displaying paintings and small sculptures. A hand-painted sign reading "Fletcher Gallery of Fine Arts" hung above the door. Naomi produced a key from her pocket and unlocked the entrance. "Please, come in," she said. "The least I can offer you is some coffee and proper thanks for your intervention." Isaac hesitated. "I should see to my horse first. Is there a stable nearby?" "Miller's livery is just 2 buildings down," she replied. "Tell him to put it on my account." "That won't be necessary, please," she interrupted, something vulnerable briefly showing through her composed exterior. "Allow me this small repayment." Isaac nodded, touched by her insistence. "I'll return shortly, then." When he came back 10 minutes later, having settled Thunder for the night, he found Naomi had lit several lamps in the gallery, illuminating an unexpectedly beautiful space. Paintings of Western landscapes hung alongside more intimate portraits and still lifes. Small sculptures occupied carefully placed pedestals. At the back, a doorway led to what appeared to be living quarters. Naomi emerged from this back room carrying a tray with coffee and some simple biscuits. She had cleaned the blood from her temple, though a small bruise was beginning to form. "Your gallery," Isaac said, gesturing around him. "It's impressive." "Thank you," she replied, setting the tray on a small table. "Most in Timber Creek don't share your appreciation." Because art seems out of place in a frontier town, she poured the coffee into 2 cups. "Partly that. And partly because of who brought it here." She handed him a cup. "You heard what they called me." Isaac accepted the coffee but didn't comment immediately, taking time to truly look at the artwork around him. Finally, he said, "In my experience, Miss Fletcher, people are quick to label what they don't understand or what makes them uncomfortable." "And does my reputation make you uncomfortable, Mr. Hart?" she asked directly. He met her gaze steadily. "I prefer to form my own opinions based on actions rather than rumors." "A rare quality," she said with a hint of genuine surprise. She sipped her coffee, watching him over the rim of her cup. "I was indeed in San Francisco before coming here. I worked at an art gallery there as an assistant curator, not what those men implied. I learned the business, developed my eye." She gestured around the room. Some of these pieces are by established artists, others are by promising talents who haven't yet been recognized, including yourself. Isaac asked, nodding toward a painting of a mountain sunset that carried no signature but seemed different from the others. A faint blush colored her cheeks. You have a good eye, Mr. Hart. Yes, a few pieces are mine, though I don't advertise that fact. They're good, he said simply. Real good. You know art. Her tone held gentle skepticism. Isaac chuckled. No, madam, can't claim that I do, but I know what moves me, and that one there speaks of someone who's seen real beauty in this hard country. She studied him with new interest. And what brings a man like you through Timber Creek, Mr. Hart? You don't strike me as someone who wanders without purpose. Isaac set down his coffee cup. The question brushed against wounds still raw, memories of a ranch in Wyoming, a partner's betrayal, a woman who'd chosen security over love. Sometimes a man needs to find new horizons, he said finally. When the old ones get too crowded with ghosts. Naomi nodded, understanding in her eyes. I'm familiar with ghosts, Mr. Hart. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Naomi tensed visibly, and Isaac's hand instinctively moved toward his holster. Miss Fletcher, called a male voice. It's Sheriff Daniels, need to have a word. Naomi's expression tightened, but she moved to open the door. The man who entered wore a tarnished star on his vest and carried himself with the weary authority of a small-town lawman. His weathered face registered surprise at seeing Isaac. Evening, the sheriff said, nodding to Isaac before turning to Naomi. Heard there was trouble at the Rusty Spur. Involving you and the Mercer brothers. The Mercer brothers were waiting for me as I closed up tonight, Naomi replied evenly. They seemed to think threats and violence were appropriate ways to express their opinions about my business. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. And I hear someone shot James Mercer in the hand. His gaze shifted to Isaac. Would that someone be you, Mr. Isaac Hart? He introduced himself. And yes, when a man draws on you with ill intent, sometimes a response is necessary. You a gunfighter, Hart? No, sir. Worked as a ranch hand mostly, sometimes as a deputy when towns needed it. This seemed to relax the sheriff slightly. You carrying papers to prove that. Isaac reached slowly into his coat and produced a folded letter from the sheriff of a Wyoming town, confirming his temporary service there the previous year. The sheriff scanned it and handed it back. Well, Mr. Hart, the Mercers are raising hell about pressing charges. But seeing as half the towns witnessed their drunken threats against Miss Fletcher these past weeks, I'm inclined to call it self-defense. He turned to Naomi. Though this situation ain't helping your case with the town council, Miss Fletcher. What situation is that? Isaac asked before Naomi could respond. The sheriff looked between them. Miss Fletcher here is facing some community pressure regarding her establishment. Some folks feel her gallery ain't in keeping with the town's character. You mean they don't approve of me, Naomi said flatly. Sheriff Daniels sighed. There's a town meeting next week. Council's voting on whether to revoke your business license on a morality clause. A morality clause, Isaac repeated incredulously. For selling artwork. It's more complicated than that, the sheriff replied, looking uncomfortable. Rumors have a way of growing legs in a small town. Especially when certain parties help them along, Naomi added bitterly. The sheriff didn't deny it. Just giving you fair warning. And you, Mr. Hart, I suggest you keep your gun holstered while you're in my town. The Mercers have friends. He tipped his hat. Evening to you both. After the sheriff left, a heavy silence filled the gallery. Naomi moved to the window, looking out at the darkened street. Now you see what you've stepped into, Mr. Hart, she said quietly. Timber Creek has decided what I am, and no amount of beautiful art or honest business will change their minds. Isaac joined her at the window. What's the real story, Miss Fletcher? Why are they so determined to run you out? Naomi turned to face him, her expression resolute. Because I refused the advances of Edwin Mercer, the father of those two you encountered tonight. He owns the bank, the largest ranch in the county, and half the businesses in town. When I opened this gallery 2 years ago, he offered his protection in exchange for personal considerations. And when you refused, the rumors began, that I had been a fallen woman in San Francisco, that my gallery was merely a front for other services. Her voice was steady, but Isaac could see the hurt beneath her composure. Some of the women who initially supported me were warned off. Clients were discouraged, and now they're using a morality clause that hasn't been invoked in a decade to shut me down legally. Isaac's jaw tightened, and the sheriff, Daniels, isn't a bad man, but he knows who pays the taxes that fund his salary. She sighed. I've managed to hold on this long because there are still good people here who buy from me despite the risks to their own standing, but they're becoming fewer. Isaac looked around at the beautiful space she'd created, at the evidence of her passion and determination. Something stirred in him that he'd thought had died back in Wyoming, the need to stand for something, to fight a wrong. What will you do if they revoke your license? He asked. Move on, I suppose. Find another town, another fresh start. She smiled sadly. I'm becoming quite practiced at those. Isaac was quiet for a long moment, considering possibilities he hadn't entertained when he rode into town hours earlier. Finally, he said, Miss Fletcher, I know we've just met, but I'd like to help if you'll allow it. She regarded him curiously. Why would you do that, Mr. Hart? You don't know me. I know enough, he replied simply. I know what it's like to face judgment based on half-truths and to stand alone against those with power, and frankly, I've been wandering too long without purpose. And what would this help entail? First, I need a job and a place to stay while I figure that out, Isaac said. I notice you have some repairs needed around here. He gestured to a sagging shelf and a crack in one wall. I'm handy with tools. Could help spruce this place up before your town council meeting. Naomi looked skeptical. The council won't change their minds because my gallery has fresh paint, Mr. Hart. Maybe not, but it gives me time to learn more about Timber Creek and the Mercers. Sometimes the right information can change the course of things. She studied him, seeming to weigh his sincerity against her natural caution. There's a small room behind the gallery I use for storage. It's modest, but it has a cot. As for payment, we can settle that later, Isaac interrupted. For now, let's consider it an exchange. Room and board for repairs and... He paused, security. You think the Mercers will try again? Men like that don't take humiliation well, Isaac said grimly. Especially at the hands of a stranger defending someone they've marked as an outcast. Naomi considered this, then extended her hand. Very well, Mr. Hart. It seems we have an arrangement. As they shook hands, Isaac felt a certainty he hadn't experienced in months. He'd ridden into Timber Creek looking for nothing more than a bed for the night. Instead, he'd found a battle worth fighting and a woman whose courage stirred something in his soul that he'd thought long buried. Call me Isaac, he said, still holding her hand. If we're to be allies in this, we might as well use given names. She smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. Then you must call me Naomi. Her hand remained in his a moment longer than necessary. And Isaac, thank you for believing there's more to me than what they say. Sometimes, he replied softly, what they say about a person tells you more about them than it does about who they're talking about. In the lamplight of the gallery, surrounded by beauty created despite adversity, Isaac felt for the first time in a long while that he'd found somewhere he needed to be. Whatever came next, he knew with bone-deep certainty that he'd meant every word when he'd told those men he'd fall with her too. The following morning, Isaac woke at dawn from habit born of years on ranches. The storage room was indeed small, with barely enough space for the cot and his few belongings, but it was clean and private more than he often got on the trail. He dressed quietly, assuming Naomi was still asleep in her quarters on the other side of the gallery. But when he stepped into the main room, he found her already up, arranging a new painting on the wall. She wore a simple blue dress, her auburn hair tied back practically, and the morning light through the windows caught the golden flecks in her amber eyes. You're up early, he observed. She glanced over her shoulder with a small smile. Art dealers and ranchers, it seems, keep similar hours. She stepped back from the painting. What do you think? It was a landscape showing a river valley at dawn, mist rising between pine-covered hills. The artist had captured not just the scene but the feeling of possibility that came with first light. It's mighty fine, Isaac said truthfully. Makes me feel like I'm standing there. That's what good art should do, Naomi replied, pleased with his assessment. Transport you somewhere else, even if just for a moment. She gestured toward a small stove in the corner where coffee was brewing. "Help yourself. I've got some bread and preserves as well." As they shared the simple breakfast, Isaac outlined his plans for the day. "First, I'll check on Thunder, then pick up some supplies for repairs. That window frame is rotting and those shelves need proper support. Anything else you'd like me to look at?" "The roof leaks when it rains heavily," Naomi admitted. "And the back door sticks something terrible." Isaac nodded. "Consider it done, but first I'd like to walk around town a bit, get the lay of the land, so to speak." Naomi's expression grew cautious. "Be careful, word travels fast here." "By now, everyone will know what happened with the Mercer brothers. All the more reason to let people see me in daylight," Isaac replied. "Shows I'm not hiding." After finishing his coffee, Isaac set out into the morning bustle of Timber Creek. It was larger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 1,500 souls, with a main street boasting several blocks of businesses. The saloon he'd encountered last night, a general store, a bank, a hotel, and various other establishments typical of a growing frontier town. As he walked, Isaac felt the stares and heard the whispers. His practiced eye noted the men who tensed at his approach and those who seemed merely curious. He made a point of nodding politely to everyone, stopping in the general store to introduce himself to the proprietor, a balding man named Harold Porter, who warmed considerably when Isaac mentioned he was doing repairs for Naomi's gallery. "Miss Fletcher's good people," Porter said quietly, leaning across the counter. "Don't let the talk fool you." "I don't put much stock in talk," Isaac replied, selecting nails and a few other supplies. Porter nodded approvingly. "You handy with more than that gun, then?" "Worked enough ranches to know my way around repairs," Isaac said. "Any recommendations for lumber, Mason's yard, end of town? Fair prices, good stock." Porter hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "But you should know his wife's cousin is married to Edwin Mercer's foreman." Might not get the warmest welcome. Isaac thanked him for the warning and continued his errands. At the livery, he checked on Thunder, pleased to find the horse well tended. The liveryman, a grizzled old-timer named Miller, was less talkative than Porter, but equally forthcoming once Isaac mentioned Naomi. "That girl's got more backbone than half the men in this town," Miller grumbled. "Comes by every week to look at my Appaloosa mare just to admire her. Always brings an apple. Person who's kind to animals ain't bad in my book, whatever they say." "And what do they say exactly?" Isaac pressed. Miller spat tobacco juice into a nearby bucket. "That she was one of them fancy women in San Francisco, that she came here running from something. That she entertains men after hours." He shrugged. "Same nonsense they say about any woman with enough spirit to live on her own terms. Any truth to it?" "Truth," Miller snorted. "Truth is, she came here 2 years back with a wagon load of paintings and dreams bigger than this town deserves. Truth is, she's turned down Edwin Mercer, which no woman in these parts has done before. That's truth enough for me." Armed with supplies and information, Isaac returned to the gallery by mid-morning. He found Naomi assisting an elderly woman who was examining a small watercolor painting. "It reminds me of the stream where Herbert proposed to me," the woman was saying, her wrinkled hands trembling slightly as she held the frame. 47 years ago this June." "Then you must have it, Mrs. Whittaker," Naomi replied warmly. "Art should speak to the heart." "Oh, I couldn't possibly." The woman hesitated. "What would Martha Collins say if she saw it in my parlor? You know how she talks." Naomi's smile dimmed slightly, but her voice remained kind. "Mrs. Whittaker, in my experience, those who would judge you for a simple painting that brings you joy are not worth worrying about." The elderly woman seemed torn, glancing nervously toward the door where Isaac now stood. Her expression changed to one of alarm. "That's him, isn't it?" She whispered loudly to Naomi. "The gunman who shot James Mercer." Before Naomi could answer, Isaac stepped forward, setting down his supplies and removing his hat respectfully. "Madam," he said with a slight bow. "Isaac Hart, I'm helping Miss Fletcher with some repairs. And I assure you, I'm no gunman, just happened to be in the wrong place at the right time last night." Mrs. Whittaker studied him with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd spent decades observing human nature. Whatever she saw in Isaac's face seemed to satisfy her, because she turned back to Naomi with newfound determination. "I'll take the painting," she declared. "And Martha Collins can just find something else to cluck about at the sewing circle." After the elderly woman had paid and left with her carefully wrapped purchase, Naomi turned to Isaac with a genuine smile. "That's the first sale I've had in 3 days. Seems Mrs. Whittaker has a mind of her own. More than most in Timber Creek," Naomi agreed. "Though I fear your presence may have been what tipped the scales, nothing like a bit of rebellion to make a purchase sweeter." Isaac laughed. "Happy to help the cause, then. I've got supplies to start on those repairs." He spent the rest of the day working on the window frames and shelving, while Naomi tended to the occasional customer who ventured in. He noticed how her demeanor changed with each person, warm and familiar with some, carefully polite with others. By late afternoon, he had replaced the rotting wood around the front window and reinforced the sagging shelves. "You weren't exaggerating about being handy," Naomi commented, bringing him a glass of water. "The place already looks better." Isaac wiped sweat from his brow. "Still need to check that roof, but might wait until morning when it's cooler. Have you eaten since breakfast? I usually close up around 5 and make a simple supper." "Sounds good to me," Isaac replied, suddenly aware of his hunger, "though I should clean up first." Naomi directed him to a wash basin in the back, and by the time he'd removed the sawdust and sweat, she had closed the gallery and was preparing a meal in her small living quarters. The space was modest, but comfortable, a combination kitchen and sitting area with a curtained doorway that presumably led to her bedroom. What struck Isaac most was how she'd transformed the simple space with touches of beauty. Wildflowers in a blue glass vase, a colorful woven throw over the chair, and several paintings that appeared more personal than those displayed in the gallery. "You've made a real home here," he observed, helping her set the small table. "I've tried," she replied. "When you've moved as often as I have, you learn to create home wherever you land." She placed a pot of stew on the table. "It's nothing fancy, just rabbit with vegetables." "Smells delicious," Isaac assured her, suddenly aware of the domestic intimacy of the moment. He couldn't remember the last time he'd shared a home-cooked meal with a woman in her own quarters. As they ate, their conversation flowed more easily than either might have expected, given their brief acquaintance. Isaac told her about his years working ranches across the territories, about the skills he'd picked up and the places he'd seen. In turn, Naomi shared stories of artists she'd known in San Francisco and her journey to become a gallery owner. "How did you end up in Timber Creek, of all places?" Isaac finally asked. Naomi's expression grew more guarded. "I saw an advertisement for a vacant storefront in a growing town. The rent was affordable, and it seemed far enough from my past to offer a fresh start." "And what were you starting fresh from?" Isaac pressed gently. She was quiet for a long moment, tracing the rim of her water glass. "I told you I worked at a gallery in San Francisco, which is true. What I didn't mention was that the owner, Mr. Hargrove, took a special interest in my career. He mentored me, taught me about art, even encouraged my own painting." Her voice hardened slightly. "I mistook his professional interest for something more honorable." Isaac listened silently, understanding where this was heading. "When his wife discovered our arrangement, there was a very public scandal. I lost my position, my reputation, and any chance of working in the art world there." She met Isaac's gaze directly. "So you see, Mr. Hart, the rumors about me aren't entirely fabricated. I did make mistakes. I did fall, in a manner of speaking." "We all fall sometimes," Isaac said quietly. "It's what we do afterward that matters." Naomi studied him with those perceptive amber eyes. "And what about you, Isaac? What mistakes are you running from?" It was his turn to look away. "I trusted the wrong people. My business partner and the woman I thought I'd marry, they found comfort in each other while I was away driving cattle to market." He gave a humorless laugh. "Came back to find they'd legally maneuvered me out of my share of the ranch we'd built together." "I'm sorry," Naomi said softly. "That's a hard betrayal." Isaac shrugged, though the pain was still evident in his eyes. "Like you said, a fresh start. Though I've been wandering without much purpose since then." "Until you decided to champion a fallen woman's art gallery," she asked with a hint of teasing. "Until I found something worth standing for," he corrected her gently. Their eyes held for a moment too long to be casual, and Isaac felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the stew. But the moment was broken by a sharp knock at the gallery's front door. Isaac instinctively rose, his hand moving toward the gun he'd set aside, expecting anyone. Naomi shook her head, her expression concerned. "No, and it's past closing time." "Stay here," Isaac instructed, moving quietly through the gallery toward the door. Through the glass, he could make out 3 figures in the gathering dusk. One of them was Sheriff Daniels. Isaac opened the door partially. "Evening, Sheriff Hart," the lawman acknowledged. "Miss Fletcher around?" "She's here. What's this about?" The sheriff glanced at his companions, a heavyset man in an expensive suit and a younger man with a supercilious expression. "Town business. This here is Mayor Holloway and Mr. Edwin Mercer." At the mention of Mercer, Isaac's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. So this was the man behind Naomi's troubles. He appeared to be in his 50s, expensively dressed, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to power. His eyes held a calculating intelligence that Isaac immediately recognized as dangerous. "I'd like to speak with Miss Fletcher," Mercer said, his cultured voice at odds with the frontier setting. "It's all right, Isaac," came Naomi's voice from behind him. She had followed despite his instruction and now stood in the doorway beside him. "Mr. Mercer, Mayor, Sheriff, to what do I owe this visit?" Mayor Holloway cleared his throat nervously. "Miss Fletcher, in light of recent disturbances. The town council has moved up the hearing regarding your business license. It will be held tomorrow at noon." "Tomorrow," Naomi repeated, her composure slipping momentarily. "The notice I received said next week." "Circumstances have changed," Mercer interjected smoothly. "The incident last night has raised concerns about the element your establishment is attracting." His eyes flicked dismissively to Isaac. "That's hardly fair," Naomi protested. "I was the victim last night, not the instigator." "Nevertheless," the mayor continued, "the decision has been made. We wanted to inform you personally as a courtesy." "A courtesy," Naomi repeated flatly. "And will I be allowed to speak in my own defense?" "Of course," Mercer said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Though I should warn you, sentiment in town has turned rather decidedly against the continued operation of your gallery." He pronounced the word as if it were a euphemism for something distasteful. "I wonder why that might be," Isaac said quietly, his gaze locked on Mercer. The older man's eyes narrowed. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced, sir." "Isaac Hart. Mr. Hart, I understand you're new to our community. Perhaps you're unaware of how things work in Timber Creek." "Oh, I think I'm getting a clear picture," Isaac replied evenly. The tension between the two men was palpable. Sheriff Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "Noon tomorrow at the town hall, Miss Fletcher. Best be on time." After they departed, Naomi closed the door and leaned against it, her face pale. "Tomorrow, they're not even giving me time to prepare." "That's because they're afraid," Isaac said, his mind already working through possibilities. "Afraid, they hold all the power. And yet they're rushing the hearing, trying to catch you off guard." Isaac paced the length of the gallery. "That tells me they're worried about something, maybe about what you might say, or who might speak for you if given time to organize." "No one will speak for me," Naomi said bitterly. "You saw how Mrs. Whittaker hesitated over buying a simple painting. Who would risk Edwin Mercer's displeasure by defending me publicly?" Isaac stopped pacing and turned to her. "I would. You've been in town one day," she protested. "Your word will carry no weight." "Maybe not, but there are others who might speak if given the right encouragement." He thought of Porter at the general store and old Miller at the livery. "People who have seen your character firsthand." Naomi looked unconvinced. "Even if a few speak up, the council is firmly in Mercer's pocket. He owns the bank that holds most of their mortgages." "Then we need leverage," Isaac said decisively. "Something that would make Mercer back down." "Like what?" Isaac ran a hand through his hair, thinking. "You mentioned he's been trying to court you since you arrived. Did he ever act inappropriately?" "Something that might embarrass him if made public." Naomi's eyes widened slightly. "Are you suggesting blackmail?" "I'm suggesting we find a way to even the playing field," Isaac corrected. "Men like Mercer don't respect fairness, but they do understand power." She considered this, then shook her head. "He was always careful, Inappropriate, yes, but always with plausible deniability, always when no one else was present. Isaac nodded, unsurprised. Men like Mercer rarely made careless mistakes. Then we need to look elsewhere. Tell me about his business dealings, his family, anything that might give us insight. As Naomi detailed what she knew about Edwin Mercer, his banking business, his large cattle ranch, his widower status, his two troublesome sons, Isaac listened carefully, looking for weaknesses. But nothing obvious presented itself. Wait, he said suddenly, remembering something. You mentioned his sons James and William, the two from the alley last night, and you said Edwin Mercer is a widower. Yes, for many years. His wife died when the boys were young. Isaac's mind was racing now. The sons would inherit everything, I assume. I suppose so, Naomi replied, not following his train of thought. What are you thinking? Just that men like Mercer are often most vulnerable through their legacy, Isaac said. Their reputation, their bloodline, their fortune, these are what they truly care about. And how does that help us? I'm not sure yet, Isaac admitted, but before tomorrow's hearing, I need to learn more about those sons of his. He checked his pocket watch. It's not yet 8. The saloon will be busy. You're going to the Rusty Spur. Naomi looked alarmed. After what happened last night, best place to hear talk, Isaac explained. And if the Mercer boys are as troublesome as they seemed, chances are good they have enemies of their own. It's too dangerous, Naomi protested. James will be looking for revenge for his hand. I'll be careful, Isaac promised, but we need information if we're going to win tomorrow. Naomi studied him, concern evident in her expression. Why are you doing this, Isaac? You could ride out of town tonight and leave all this trouble behind. It was a fair question, one Isaac had asked himself throughout the day. Why risk so much for a woman he barely knew? Yet the answer felt simple when he looked at her. Because some battles are worth fighting, he said quietly. And because I meant what I said in that alley. If this town wants to cast you out for being fallen, then I'll gladly fall alongside you. The sincerity in his voice seemed to touch something in Naomi. She stepped closer and, after a moment's hesitation, placed her hand on his arm. Be careful, she said again, but this time the words carried a different weight. And come back. Isaac covered her hand with his own. I will. The Rusty Spur Saloon was exactly what Isaac had expected, a large, noisy establishment filled with the mingled scents of whiskey, sweat, and tobacco smoke. A piano player pounded out a lively tune in the corner, nearly drowned out by the cacophony of gamblers, drinkers, and working girls plying their trade. Isaac entered casually, making his way to the bar as if he had no concerns in the world. He ordered a whiskey, paid with a coin, and leaned back against the counter, surveying the room with practiced nonchalance. The bartender, a burly man with an impressive mustache, eyed him curiously. You're the fellow who shot James Mercer last night. It wasn't a question, but Isaac nodded anyway. Seems news travels fast. Small town, the bartender replied, wiping a glass. Got a name? Isaac Hart. Clarence Webb, the man offered in return. You looking for more trouble tonight? Isaac sipped his whiskey. Just looking for a drink and some conversation. Webb snorted. Well, you've got the drink. Conversation might come with complications, depending on who's doing the talking. He nodded toward a table in the corner. Mercer boys ain't here yet, if that's what you're wondering. But they usually show up around 9. And James has been telling anyone who'll listen that he's going to put a bullet in you first chance he gets. Appreciate the warning, Isaac said mildly. Not a warning, Webb corrected. Just facts. What a man does with facts is his own business. He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, though if you're smart, you'll finish that drink and be elsewhere by 9. Isaac merely smiled and asked, You know the Mercer boys well? Webb shrugged. Known them since they were kids. Entitled little brats then, entitled grown men now. Think their father's money and name gives them the right to do as they please. And does it give them that right? In Timber Creek, more often than not. Webb leaned closer. Look, mister, I don't know what your interest is in the Mercers, and I don't want to know. But they're bad news, especially when crossed. Isaac nodded thoughtfully. And their father, is he cut from the same cloth? Edwin, Webb considered this. Different style, same result. The boys break things, the father buys silence. The boys threaten with fists and guns. The father threatens with foreclosures and ruined reputations. He straightened as new customers approached the bar. Like I said, best be elsewhere by 9, but Isaac had no intention of leaving. Instead, he moved to a corner table that gave him a good view of both the entrance and the room. Over the next hour, he nursed his drink and observed, occasionally engaging in brief conversations with other patrons. Most were guarded once they learned his name, but a few were more forthcoming, especially those who had their own grudges against the Mercers. From a cattle drover, he learned that the Mercer Ranch was suspected of altering brands on stray calves. From a card player, he heard rumors that William Mercer had a gambling problem that had led to significant debts in larger towns. Most interestingly, from one of the saloon girls who stopped by his table, he discovered that James Mercer had a reputation for violence against women that his father had repeatedly covered up with money. Last year, he near killed Bessie Girl who used to work here, the woman confided, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. Beat her so bad she couldn't work for weeks. Mr. Mercer paid her to leave town and keep quiet. And no charges were filed, Isaac asked. The woman laughed bitterly. Sheriff Daniels wrote it up as an accident, said she fell down the stairs. This pattern of behavior confirmed what Isaac had suspected: the Mercers operated above the law in Timber Creek, with Edwin using his influence and money to clean up his son's messes. It was a common enough arrangement in frontier towns where wealth equaled power. Just before 9, the atmosphere in the saloon subtly shifted. Conversations quieted, and several patrons glanced toward the door. Isaac followed their gaze to see William Mercer enter, followed by his brother James, whose right hand was heavily bandaged. William spotted Isaac immediately. He leaned toward James, muttering something that made the injured man's face contort with rage. They started across the room directly toward Isaac's table. Well, William drawled when they reached him. If it isn't the hero of Timber Creek, enjoying our town's hospitality. Isaac didn't rise, merely regarded them calmly. Evening, gentlemen, care to join me for a drink? James lunged forward, but William held him back. My brother's not in a drinking mood, I'm afraid. Seems his hand is painting him something fierce. That's a shame, Isaac replied evenly, though from what I hear, it might improve his aim. Several nearby patrons snickered, which only inflamed James further. You're a dead man, Hart, he snarled. Not from where I'm sitting, Isaac observed. His posture remained relaxed, but his eyes were alert, watching both brothers carefully. William, the more controlled of the two, studied Isaac with calculating eyes. You're either very brave or very stupid to show your face here tonight. I prefer to think of it as sociable, Isaac replied. Getting to know the town and its leading citizens. And how's Miss Fletcher this evening? William asked with feigned politeness. Preparing for tomorrow's hearing, I imagine, though she shouldn't bother, the outcome is already decided. Is it? Isaac leaned forward slightly. That seems mighty confident, considering the hearing hasn't even started. William smirked. My father doesn't lose, Hart, not in Timber Creek. The sooner you and that whore understand that, the better for everyone. Isaac's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. You know, it's interesting. I've been sitting here for over an hour, talking to quite a few people about you two and your father, hearing all sorts of interesting stories. For the first time, uncertainty crossed William's face. What's that supposed to mean? It means reputations are fragile things, Isaac said softly. Even established ones. Push too hard against Miss Fletcher, and some of those stories might find their way to places your father's money can't reach. James made another aborted lunge, but William's restraining hand tightened. Are you threatening us, Hart? Not at all. Just making an observation about how information travels. Isaac stood slowly, keeping his hands visible and away from his holster. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's getting late, and I have a busy day tomorrow. This isn't finished, James growled. No, Isaac agreed, his voice hardening for the first time. But it will be one way or another. Good evening, gentlemen. He walked out of the saloon with measured steps, aware of every eye following him but never turning his back fully on the Mercer brothers. Outside, the night air was cool and clear, a welcome relief from the smoky interior. Isaac remained alert as he made his way back toward Naomi's gallery, his mind processing everything he'd learned. The pieces were starting to come together, not enough yet for a complete strategy, but the outline of one was forming. Edwin Mercer's power rested on his reputation and his son's inheritance. If those were threatened in the right way, he might be persuaded to back down. But first, Isaac needed to speak with one more person. Instead of turning toward the gallery, he headed for the small house behind the sheriff's office where Daniels was known to live. It was a risky move, confronting the lawman directly, but Isaac had seen something in Daniels' demeanor during their brief encounters that suggested the man wasn't entirely comfortable with the Mercer's influence. The sheriff answered his knock with a scowl that deepened when he recognized his visitor. "Hart, what the hell are you doing here?" "Need to talk," Isaac replied simply. "About tomorrow's hearing, and about James Mercer's habit of beating women." Daniel's expression flickered with something guilt, perhaps, or resignation. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped back from the door. "You'd better come in," he said, "before someone sees you." Isaac returned to the gallery an hour later to find Naomi waiting anxiously in the front room, a lamp burning low on the counter. She rose quickly when he entered. "Thank goodness," she breathed. "I was worried." "Had a few stops to make," Isaac explained, removing his hat. "Including a conversation with our sheriff." Naomi's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Daniels, what did he say?" "Quite a bit, actually." Isaac took a seat, feeling the day's exertions catching up with him. "Seems our sheriff is a more complicated man than he appears. He's been keeping records documentation of complaints against the Mercers that never made it to official charges. Insurance, he called it. Insurance against what? Against the day Edwin Mercer's influence might wane," Isaac explained. "Daniels isn't corrupt so much as practical. He enforces the law as much as he can without crossing Mercer, and he documents the rest." Naomi looked skeptical. "And he just told you all this. Why would he trust you?" "Because I convinced him that tomorrow might be that day he's been waiting for," Isaac said with a slight smile. "And because, deep down, he's ashamed of how the town has treated you." He proceeded to outline what he'd learned at the saloon and the plan that had formed in his mind. As he spoke, Naomi's expression changed from skepticism to cautious hope. "Do you really think it could work?" she asked when he finished. "It's a gamble," Isaac admitted, "but it's the best chance we have. Mercer cares about two things: his reputation and his legacy. If we threaten both, he might be willing to compromise." Naomi was quiet for a moment, considering. "And if he doesn't, if he calls our bluff?" "Then we'll have made an enemy even more powerful than he already was," Isaac acknowledged. "But sometimes, Naomi, you have to be willing to risk everything for what matters." Their eyes met in the lamplight, and something unspoken passed between them. Without conscious thought, Isaac reached out to take her hand. Her fingers intertwined with his, warm and certain. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said softly, "I want you to know that meeting you, it's changed something in me, woken something I thought was dead." Naomi's amber eyes held his, searching. "In me too," she whispered, "though it terrifies me." "Why?" "Because people leave, Isaac, or they change their minds when loving me becomes too complicated." He shook his head slowly. "Not everyone, not me." The conviction in his voice seemed to reach her. She leaned forward and he met her halfway. Their kiss was gentle at first, tentative, the kiss of two people who had known betrayal and were cautious with trust. But it deepened quickly, becoming something more urgent, more honest. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Naomi rested her forehead against his. "We barely know each other," she murmured. "Sometimes," Isaac replied. "The heart knows what it needs before the mind catches up." They remained that way for a long moment, connected, the lamplight casting soft shadows around them. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but for tonight, they had found something neither had expected: a fragile beginning, a possible future, a reason to fight. The town hall was packed by noon the following day. It seemed all of Timber Creek had turned out for the hearing, drawn by the combination of controversy and entertainment it promised. The 5 members of the town council sat at a long table on a raised platform at the front of the room, with Mayor Holloway in the center. Naomi and Isaac entered together, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She wore her best dress, a deep green that complemented her auburn hair, and carried herself with dignity, despite the whispers that followed their progress to the front of the room. Isaac had dressed carefully as well, in a clean shirt and his least worn vest, his gun conspicuously absent as a sign of respect for the proceedings. Edwin Mercer sat in the front row with his sons, looking supremely confident in an expensive suit. He nodded cordially to several council members, who nodded back with the deference of men who owed their positions to his influence. Mayor Holloway called the meeting to order with a bang of his gavel. We are gathered today to consider the business license of the Fletcher Gallery of Fine Arts, currently operated by Miss Naomi Fletcher. He adjusted his spectacles. The issue before us is whether this establishment meets the moral standards required of businesses in Timber Creek, as outlined in Town Ordinance No. 18, Section 4. Isaac noticed how carefully the mayor avoided mentioning the specific allegations against Naomi or her gallery. This was to be a polite execution, dressed in the language of civic responsibility. Miss Fletcher, the mayor continued, you may speak on your own behalf. Naomi rose gracefully, her composure admirable given the circumstances. Thank you, Mayor Holloway, council members, citizens of Timber Creek. For 2 years, I have operated my gallery with integrity and professionalism. I have paid my taxes promptly, maintained my property, and contributed to this community's cultural life. Her voice strengthened as she continued. The allegations against my character are unfounded, and the suggestion that my gallery is anything other than a legitimate business is both false and defamatory. From the audience came a few murmurs of support, notably from Mrs. Whittaker and, surprisingly, old Miller from the livery. But these were quickly drowned out by louder murmurs of disagreement. We have heard rumors, began one council member, a thin man with spectacles. Rumors are not evidence, Naomi interrupted firmly. I challenge anyone in this room to provide a single piece of factual evidence that my gallery has operated outside the law or public decency. Edwin Mercer stood then, smoothly taking control of the proceedings. If I may, Mr. Mayor. While Miss Fletcher demands evidence, I believe the issue before us is one of community standards. Timber Creek has always prided itself on being a God-fearing, moral community where decent families can raise their children without exposure to unsavory influences. And what unsavory influence do you allege my gallery represents, Mr. Mercer? Naomi asked directly. Mercer smiled thinly. It is not merely your business, Miss Fletcher, but your personal reputation that concerns us, a woman of your background. Operating independently, entertaining male visitors at all hours, these things set a poor example for the young women of our community. The room erupted in a mixture of agreement and protest. Mayor Holloway banged his gavel repeatedly to restore order. Furthermore, Mercer continued when the noise subsided, the recent violence associated with your establishment resulting in injury to my son demonstrates the disruptive influence your presence has on our peaceful town. At this, Isaac rose to stand beside Naomi. Mr. Mayor, if I may address the council, the mayor looked uncomfortable but nodded. You are Isaac Hart. I've been assisting Miss Fletcher with repairs to her gallery. I'm also the man who intervened when James and William Mercer assaulted Miss Fletcher in an alley 2 nights ago. This caused another stir in the audience. James Mercer half rose, his bandaged hand clenched into a fist, but his father placed a restraining hand on his arm. Mr. Hart, the mayor said nervously, while we appreciate your concern, this hearing is about Miss Fletcher's business license, not the incident you reference. With all due respect, Mr. Mayor, the incidents are connected, Isaac replied firmly. Miss Fletcher is being judged not on the operation of her gallery, which by all accounts is above reproach, but on rumors about her past, and on the violence directed toward her by others. He turned to face the crowded room. I've only been in Timber Creek a short time, but I've learned a great deal about how justice works here. I've spoken with citizens who admire Miss Fletcher's courage and integrity. I've also heard how certain individuals in positions of power have used their influence to silence those who might speak on her behalf. His gaze settled on Edwin Mercer. It seems to me that when a man uses his wealth to punish a woman for rejecting his advances, that's a far greater moral failure than anything Miss Fletcher stands accused of. The blunt accusation sent a shock wave through the room. Edwin Mercer's face darkened with anger, but before he could respond, Sheriff Daniels stepped forward from the back of the hall. "Mr. Mayor," he called out, "I believe I should speak to this matter as the town's law enforcement officer." Mayor Holloway, clearly flustered by the unexpected turn of events, nodded. "Of course, Sheriff, please." Daniels made his way to the front, nodding slightly to Isaac and Naomi as he passed them. He turned to face the assembly, his weathered face grave. "For 6 years, I've served as sheriff of Timber Creek," he began. "In that time, I've tried to uphold the law fairly, though I'll be the first to admit I haven't always succeeded." He glanced meaningfully at Mercer. "There have been times when I've looked the other way or accepted compromises that didn't sit right with my conscience." The room had grown utterly silent, every person present sensing that something unprecedented was occurring. "In my professional judgment," Daniels continued, "Miss Fletcher has operated her business legally and morally since arriving in Timber Creek. The only disturbances associated with her gallery have been instigated by others, specifically by James and William Mercer, who have harassed Miss Fletcher repeatedly over the past year." James Mercer leapt to his feet. "That's a damn lie." "Sit down, James," the sheriff commanded sharply. "I have documented reports from multiple witnesses. Would you like me to read them aloud?" The threat was clear. After a tense moment, James subsided, though his eyes burned with hatred. "Furthermore," Daniels continued, "I have in my possession sworn statements regarding other incidents involving the Mercer family incidents that have been settled privately rather than through proper legal channels." He patted the pocket of his vest. "These documents are currently sealed, but should this council vote to revoke Miss Fletcher's license on spurious moral grounds, I will feel obligated to make them public record." The implication hung in the air. Edwin Mercer's expression had changed from anger to something more calculating, more cautious. Isaac stepped forward again. "Mr. Mayor, council members, citizens of Timber Creek, I believe we're at a crossroads. This hearing isn't really about Miss Fletcher's gallery. It's about whether your town will be governed by justice or by the influence of a single powerful family." He looked directly at Mercer. "Sir, I understand your concern for your family's reputation. I respect that. But using that influence to persecute an innocent woman because she refused your advances, that's not the legacy a man of your standing should want to leave." For a long moment, the town hall was utterly silent. Then, unexpectedly, Mrs. Whittaker stood up from her seat near the middle of the room. "I have purchased artwork from Miss Fletcher's gallery on multiple occasions," the elderly woman announced in a quavering but determined voice. "Her establishment has brought beauty and culture to our town. If supporting her business makes me immoral in the eyes of some, then so be it." Her brave statement seemed to break a dam. One by one, others stood: Miller from the livery, Porter from the general store, and several more citizens who had quietly appreciated Naomi's presence in Timber Creek, but had been afraid to say so publicly. Mayor Holloway looked increasingly uncomfortable. He leaned over to confer briefly with the other council members, then cleared his throat. "In light of these various testimonials, perhaps we should postpone any decision on Miss Fletcher's license until we can more thoroughly investigate all claims." But Edwin Mercer had risen again, his expression now one of careful neutrality. "If I may make a suggestion, Mr. Mayor, it seems to me that this hearing has become unnecessarily adversarial. Perhaps a compromise could be reached." "What sort of compromise do you propose, Mr. Mercer?" the mayor asked. Mercer straightened his jacket. "I move that we table this matter indefinitely, allowing Miss Fletcher to continue operating her gallery under the same terms as any other business in Timber Creek." He glanced at Sheriff Daniels. "In the spirit of community harmony, I believe it would be best if certain historical grievances were also laid to rest." It was a strategic retreat, offered with enough dignity to save face. The council members looked relieved at this solution, nodding their agreement almost in unison. "Does that proposal satisfy you, Miss Fletcher?" Mayor Holloway asked. Naomi stepped forward, her head held high. "It does, Mr. Mayor, provided that the agreement includes protection from future harassment or unfounded accusations." "I believe Sheriff Daniels can ensure that," the mayor said, looking to the lawman for confirmation. Daniels nodded firmly. "I certainly can and will." With a final bang of his gavel, Mayor Holloway declared the matter resolved. The tension in the room slowly dissipated as people rose to leave, many stopping to speak quietly with Naomi or offer tentative smiles of support. Edwin Mercer approached them last, his sons noticeably absent. "Miss Fletcher," he said stiffly, "it seems we've reached an understanding." "So it seems, Mr. Mercer," she replied, her tone polite but cool. He turned to Isaac. "Mr. Hart, you've proven yourself quite the advocate. I admire your conviction, if not your methods." "Just standing for what's right," Isaac responded evenly. Mercer studied him for a moment longer, then nodded once and departed without another word. When the hall had emptied except for the two of them, Naomi turned to Isaac, her eyes bright with unshed tears of relief. "We did it," she whispered. "I can hardly believe it." "You did it," Isaac corrected gently. "Your courage, your integrity, that's what won today. The town just needed to be reminded of it." She shook her head. "Not without you. If you hadn't come to Timber Creek, hadn't stood beside me, then someone else would have eventually," Isaac said. "Truth has a way of emerging sooner or later." Naomi stepped closer, her hand finding his. "What happens now?" It was the question that had been hovering between them since the previous night's kiss. What came next for them, individually and perhaps together? "That depends," Isaac said, his voice softening. "I still have repairs to finish on your gallery. The roof still leaks, remember?" Naomi smiled. "And after the repairs," Isaac looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. "I've been wandering a long time, Naomi. Looking for a place, a purpose that felt right." He took a deep breath. "I think I might have found both in Timber Creek, if there's a reason for me to stay." "Is there?" she asked softly, her amber eyes searching his. Instead of answering with words, Isaac drew her gently into his arms and kissed her, not with the tentative exploration of the previous night, but with the certainty of a man who had found his home. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "They said you were fallen," he murmured, "but all I see is someone who had the courage to rise again." "Then rise with me," Naomi whispered back. "Stay, build something here with me." In that moment, in the empty town hall where justice had finally prevailed, Isaac knew with bone-deep certainty that his wandering days were over. The path ahead would have its challenges. The Mercers' defeat today didn't mean they would forget, and small towns had long memories for scandal, but for the first time in years, he looked forward to those challenges because he wouldn't face them alone. "Yes," he said simply, "I'll stay." The summer of 1878 passed into autumn in a blur of golden days and deepening feelings. Isaac completed the repairs to Naomi's gallery, then found more permanent employment as Miller's assistant at the livery, a position that suited his way with horses and provided a steady income. In the evenings, he would return to the gallery, sometimes helping Naomi with customers, sometimes watching in appreciative silence as she worked on her own paintings. Their courtship progressed with a sweet inevitability that surprised them both. Neither had expected to find love in Timber Creek. Naomi had resigned herself to independence, and Isaac had stopped believing in second chances. Yet they discovered in each other a kindred resilience, a shared understanding of what it meant to fall and rise again. Timber Creek gradually adjusted to their relationship. There were still whispers, of course, and occasionally direct confrontations, but these grew less frequent as time passed. The Mercers maintained a cold distance, their influence in town undiminished but no longer directed at destroying Naomi. By Christmas, Isaac had moved from the small storage room to Naomi's living quarters, their relationship now open and acknowledged. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the small fire in her now their sitting room, he presented her with a simple gold ring. "It's not fancy," he apologized, watching nervously as she examined it, "but it was my mother's, the only thing of value I've carried with me all these years." Naomi looked up at him, her amber eyes shimmering with tears. "It's perfect," she whispered. "But are you certain, Isaac? Marriage to me won't be easy. There will always be those who remember the rumors, who judge." Isaac took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. "Let them judge. Let them talk. I know who you are, who we are together. That's all that matters to me." Their wedding in February was small but meaningful, attended by those who had stood with them during the hearing and others who had come to appreciate the quiet dignity with which they lived their lives. Sheriff Daniels served as Isaac's best man, a friendship that had grown from mutual respect into genuine camaraderie. As spring arrived, bringing new growth and possibilities, Isaac and Naomi made plans to expand the gallery. With his carpentry skills and her artistic vision, they added a workshop where Isaac could create custom frames and Naomi could teach art lessons to the town's children, something that had been her dream since opening the gallery. By summer, they received unexpected news Naomi was expecting their first child. The prospect of parenthood brought both joy and renewed determination to build a life where their child would be judged on their own merits, not on fading rumors about their mother's past. "What shall we name him?" Isaac asked one evening as they sat on the small porch they'd added to the gallery, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in hues that even Naomi couldn't fully capture on canvas. "Him?" she laughed, resting her hands on her still flat stomach. "So certain it's a boy." "Just a feeling," Isaac replied with a smile. "A son with his mother's artistic eye and stubborn spirit. And if it's a daughter, then she'll have her father's sense of justice and, heaven help us, his stubborn streak as well." Naomi leaned against his shoulder, contentment in every line of her body. "I never thought I'd have this," she confessed quietly. "A husband who sees me for who I am, a child, a future not shadowed by the past." Isaac wrapped his arm around her. "When I heard those men call you fallen, something in me couldn't stand it, not because I thought they were wrong about your past, but because they were wrong about what it meant. We all fall, Naomi. The measure of a person is whether they have the courage to get back up." She turned to look at him, her amber eyes reflecting the dying sunlight. "You gave me that courage, Isaac. You fell with me, just as you promised that first night." "No," he corrected gently, placing his hand over hers. "We rose together, and we'll keep rising no matter what comes." As twilight settled over Timber Creek, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about their plans for the gallery, for their growing family, for the future they were building together. The path that had led them to each other had been marked by loss and betrayal, by falls both metaphorical and literal. But in finding each other, they had discovered an essential truth that sometimes falling isn't an end but a beginning. Their child, a son they would name Thomas, arrived the following winter, born into a home filled with art and love and the quiet strength of two people who had found redemption in each other's arms. As the years passed, they would add a daughter to their family, expand their gallery into a cultural center for the growing town, and become fixtures in a community that had once threatened to cast them out. And occasionally, when newcomers to Timber Creek would whisper about Naomi's rumored past or question how a respectable man like Isaac Hart could have married such a woman, old-timers would share the story how a chance encounter in an alley had led to a love story that changed their town. How when they said she was fallen, the cowboy had answered, "Then I'll fall with her too." But those who truly knew them understood the deeper truth that in falling together, Isaac and Naomi Hart had actually been rising all along.